غرباء 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 ولغير الله لا نحمي الجباه غرباء.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله من استنى بسنته ودعا بدعوته إلى مدينة مع بعد. In today's lesson we will be looking at al-hadith al-Mudabbaj up to hopefully the end of the poem where the poet he says وَمَا رَوَى كُلُّ قَرِينٍ أَنْ أَخِهِ مُدَبَّجٌ فَعَرِفُ حَقًّا وَانْتَخِهِ. So he says a hadith, when we have, it's not particularly describing a specific hadith, but it's describing a feature in narrators, okay? When each narrator has narrated from his colleague, okay? A hadith that has its narrator narrating from his colleague, then it is said to be al-hadith al-mudabbaj. وَمَا رَوَى كُلُّ قَرِينٍ أَنْ أَخِهِ. If each narrator narrates from his subsequent narrator, so the student narrates from the teacher in turn narrates from the student. Okay, this is called mudabbaj. فَعَرِفُ, know this, حَقًّا وَانْتَخِهِ. Okay, so al-hadith al-mudabbaj is مَا رَوَاهُ كُلُّ قَرِينٍ أَنْ قَرِينِهِ. When each narrator narrates, so they are usually like mates in ages, in the same tabaqa, and they narrate from each other, then this is said to be al-mudabbaj. This is al-mudabbaj. And he says فَعَرِفُ وَانْتَخِهِ, beware of this, وَانْتَخِهِ, I وَافْتَخِرْ بِهِ, and be proud of it. You know, and the reason here is, in general, narrators don't want to narrate from people of their level. Okay, they rather want to narrate from the level of their teachers and even their teachers' teachers. Generally, they don't even want to narrate from their level. Now, imagine he narrates from someone who is a student of his. This shows the person's humility. And so, when you read the books of Siyar, the books of Rijal, al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, you would find them praising scholars by saying يَنْزِلُ إِلَىٰ أَنْ يَرْوِي عَنْ فُلَانٍ. Sometimes he comes down so much to the level that he will record from someone who is below his level. And this is something praiseworthy because it shows that the narrator is humble. Then in the 28th line, he talks about al-muttafiq wal-muftariq, where he says muttafiqun lamzan wa khattan muttafiq wa ضده فيما ذكرنا المفترق. He says muttafiqun lafzan wa khattan, when we have the names of narrators agreeing in how they are pronounced and in how they are written, this part of the feature is called muttafiq. Their names are muttafiq, such that you write in the same way, you pronounce it the same way. وَضِدُّهُ فِيمَا ذَكَرَ الْمُفْتَرِقِ. But when we look at the narrators, their personalities, they are different. This part of this feature is called al-muftariq. And so these are not two kinds of hadiths. One, they just have two terms to describe them, okay? So it's called al-muttafiq wal-muftariq. There are two narrators who agree in their names. There are two narrators whose names are the same, but their personalities are different, okay? So you have narrators like al-Khalil bin Ahmad. Al-Khalil bin Ahmad, there are two people by the name, but then their personalities are different, okay? One is Basra Nahwi, the teacher of Sibawayh, okay? And then there is another by a different field, okay? So we have their names agreeing, but their personalities are different, like Abu Imran al-Jawni. There are about two people with this name. There's Abdul Malik bin Habib, who is a tabi'i, and there's Musa bin Sahil, who is a student of Hisham bin Urwa. So he's not a tabi'i. Okay, so there's Abu Imran al-Jawni. Here their kunya are the same. Abu Imran al-Jawni. They have the same kunya, right? But their personalities differ. When you start to go to their names, you will see that they are different. But when their kunya and their towns are mentioned, you would see that they are the same. Okay, there's Muhammad bin Abdillah al-Ansari, two people with the same name, but they differ in tabaqat. Okay, Muhammad bin Abdillah al-Ansari, two people, the same name, but they have different tabaqat, different levels when you take when they appeared. So this is al-muttafiq wal-muftariq. Al-muttafiq ay fil asma wal-muftariq fil ashkhas. So there are people whose names agree in every sense, but then their personalities are different. And when I went to high school, there was Abdurrahman Muhammad and I am Abdurrahman Muhammad again. But then he was in level 4. He was in SS4. Okay. They called him Rahman, they called me Rahman. The difference was that he was a senior, I was a junior. In UCC as well, in our hall, I was Abdurrahman Muhammad, there was another Abdurrahman Muhammad. I was in second year and he was in first year, and we were very close to. He used to attend all my majalis. So these people, when you in relationship, we say we are al-muttafiq wal-muftariq. Our names are the same, but our personalities were different. This is al-muttafiq wal-muftariq. Al-muttafiq ay fil asma. That's why I say muttafiqun lafzan wa khattan. Names that agree in pronunciation and in writing. Muttafiq wa dudduhu fi ma dhakara al-muftariq, but their personalities are different. Then there is al-mu'talif wal-mukhtalif. Al-mu'talif wal-mukhtalif. So he says mu'talifun muttafiqul khatti faqat wa dudduhu mukhtalifun fakhshal ghalat. Now al-mu'talif wal-mukhtalif, Ibn Salah, he says هذا فن جليل من لم يعرفه من المحدثين كثر إثاره ولم يعدم مخجلا. Ibn Salah said this is a very important field in hadith, and any person who does not know it, he will make so many mistakes. Okay, so many disgraceful mistakes. فخشى الغلط. So مؤتلف متفق الخط فقط. So there's mu'talif. Mu'talif is when their writings agree. We have two narrators, and their names, when you write them, they are the same. Like, let's say, when you write their names, they are similar. I'm trying to see, like Sa'ad and or let's say, I'm trying to see if I'll get some names that are similar. Let's see, Ghanam and Atham. And do realize back in the days there were no nuqat, those dots we have today. Ghanam, the grain has a dot on it, Noon has a dot with a shadda, and Atham, the ayn has nothing, and the tha has 3 dots. And back in the days, none of them, Anam had no dot anywhere, Atham also had no dot anywhere. So you see, when you write them, they are the same. Only in the pronunciation, they change. Busra and say Bashar, or even Abu Bakr and Abu Bakr, well, there's a ta marbuta at the end, so that would somewhat differentiate them. Something like Absi and Ansi. Absi and Ansi. Now, Absi has a dot below the ba, and Ansi has a dot above the noon. But back in the days, the ba had no dot, and the noon had no dot. So they agreed in the way they are written, but they are pronounced differently. This is mu'talifun muttafiqul khatti faqat. The way you write them are the same. Wadudduhu mukhtalifun, but when you pronounce them, they differ. This is al-mu'talif wal-mukhtalif. You write them the same, but you pronounce them differently. Fakhshal ghalat, he says, be watchful and fear. Be watchful of making mistakes here, because it's very easy to make mistakes. It's very easy to make mistakes. And that's how we had something like tashif, where names are changed. A perfect example without even having to think about the dot is salam and salam. Salam and salam. Salam has no shadda, salam has shadda. So it's very easy to confuse these names, salam and salam. It's very easy to confuse this name, Umara and Imara. Umara and Imara. The difference is Dhamma and Kasra. Umara and Imara. This is the difference, you see. And then there's Al-Hadith Al-Munkar. And then there's Al-Hadith Al-Munkar. Al-Hadith Al-Munkar is one of the very, very important divisions in Hadith science. Given that you find it very common in the discussions of the earlier scholars. Okay, in defining it, he says, وَالْمُنْكَرُ الْفَرْضُ بِهِ رَوٍ غَدَى تَعْدِيلُهُ لَا يَحْمِلُ التَّفَرُّدَ. He says, a hadith is said to be munkar if a single narrator narrates it. تَعْدِيلُهُ لَا يَحْمِلُ التَّفَرُّدَ, but he is such that his level of reliability is not such that he can be trusted to single-handedly make a narration. And I always give this example, say, there's a question that the entire class is confused about. No one has a solution except some backbencher who scores, say, 20 feet in class. There are about 60 people. And this person, he sits at the back. And when exams is written and they are ranked, he scores 25. And he alone has a solution to the problem. You will see that there are not so many people who will trust him with his answer. So it's the same here. The narrator, he's not extremely weak. He's not extremely weak. Okay? But then he single-handedly narrates a hadith that possibly should be narrated by more. Let's say the person narrates a hadith regarding salah. Like the hadith of أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه is recorded by Ja'far bin Sulaiman from Ali al-Rifa'i. Okay, from Abu Najj al-Mutawakkil from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Now, he narrates this hadith, and although Ali ibn Ali al-Rifa'i is, like Ahmad bin Hanbal says, la ba'sa bihi, except that sometimes he single-handedly narrates narrations and he does raf' mawquf. And so the scholars, including Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, including at-Tirmidhi, including Abu Dawud, including Ibn Khuzaymah, including Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, and several others, they've considered this hadith to be da'if. And you could even go as further to say it is munkar, because الراوي الذي تفرد به تهديله لا يحمل التفرد. Okay, so this hadith could be considered to be munkar. And so the best way, the proper way to say isti'adha is أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, like it is popularly known, not أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم, like we all once thought. But what is most correct is simply أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Okay. وَالْمُنْكَرُ الْفَرْضُ بِهِ رَوٍ غَدَى. So a hadith is said to be munkar when a narrator who is slightly reliable single-handedly narrates it. تَعْدِيلُهُ لَا يَحْمِلُ التَّفَرُّدَ, but his level of reliability is not that strong such that we would trust him when he single-handedly narrates a hadith. Now, then we have al-hadith al-matruk. Al-hadith al-matruk. Now, al-hadith al-matruk doesn't exist as a hadith per se. It's more a description of a narrator. Okay? Anyway, he says, مَتْرُكُهُ مَا وَاحِدٌ بِهِمْ فَرَدْ وَأَجْمَعُوا لِضَعْفِهِ فَهُوَ كَرَدْ. A hadith is said to be matruk when one narrator narrates it and the scholars are agree وَأَجْمَعُوا لِضَعْفِهِ, and all the scholars are agree that he's da'if, فَهُوَ كَرَدْ. So it is similar to a hadith that is mardud. Okay, a hadith that is mawdu', a hadith that is fabricated, which we will be discussing next. But then matruk is in fact a description of a narrator when all the scholars agree that he is not reliable, he makes severe mistakes, then we say he is matruk. Okay, he is matruk, and we don't say the hadith rather is matruk. And so you often find them say matrukul hadith, matrukul hadith. His hadith is not acceptable. And finally, there's al-hadith al-mawdu'. He says, وَالْكَذِبُ الْمُخْتَلَقُ الْمَصْنُوعُ عَلَى النَّبِي فَذَلِكَ الْمَوْضُوعُ. He says, a hadith is said to be mawdu' if it is al-kadhib al-mukhtalaq, if a lie that is fabricated, al-masnu', a made-up fabricated lie. A made-up fabricated lie. عَلَى النَّبِي, onto the Prophet ﷺ, فَذَلِكَ الْمَوْضُوعُ, then the hadith is said to be mawdu'. Now, this definition of al-hadith al-mawdu' is only partly correct. A hadith does not have to be a lie, and so the narrators do not have to, and this is, we know that it is a lie when there is a narrator in it who is a liar, okay, or who is accused of lying. And so most people, this one they consider to judge a hadith to be a lie, to be mawdu'. When the narrator, when any of the narrators is a liar, then we say the hadith is mawdu'. But then we don't actually always need a narrator who is a liar to conclude that the hadith is mawdu'. Rather, we can simply look at the chain, even if there's no liar in it. When such a chain is not possible, then we will conclude that it is mawdu'. So there are these asanid that are known as, for example, there's a sanad that would be called isnadun muslimun, and there's a sanad that would be called isnadun mudi'un. A sanad is said to be mudi', sanadun mudi'un, when it's of the soundest isnad, like Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar. Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar. Now, when this kind of narrate, and Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar, any of these narrators is very popular with several students. Malik has so many students. Malik had so many students. Nafi, the same. Ibn Umar, the same. So when there's a hadith through Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar, it should have several narrators from the level of Malik. Okay, from the level of Malik, we should have about at least 3, 4, 10, 20 students narrating from Imam Malik. Then we come to find someone from far away from Africa who is not very popular among the students of Malik. He single-handedly narrates from Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar. We will say this hadith is recorded by some unknown narrator through isnadun mudhi'. So this isnad would be da'if, and so we would conclude that this chain is close to being a lie, and therefore the sanad is mawdu', the hadith is mawdu', although there's no direct liar in it. Another is to look at the text of the hadith. We look at the text of the hadith. So we look at the hadith, and we have in al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, for example, Imam Hanbal, when he was discussing Abu Shayba Ibrahim, he said ahadithuhu kadhiba, his ahadith have lies in them. Okay, wa huwa salihun, but he himself is righteous. If he's righteous, he wouldn't tell a lie. So Abu Talib asked him, then how does he narrate ahadith that are lies? And he said, al-bala'u al-ghafla. He is so ignorant that he didn't pay attention. Anything he heard, he narrated. So he wasn't lying, but any time he heard anyone narrating anything, he would also narrate it. And so his ahadith, you could see they are lies, although he himself is not a liar. So Imam Hanbal is telling us that a hadith could be a lie, even if the narrator is not a liar. And so al-Zahabi, he defines al-hadith al-mawdu' as ma khalafa qa'idata min qawa'id al-Islam, a hadith that contradicts the principles of Islam, for example. Okay, another thing is when the scholars are agreed that there's no authentic hadith in a particular bab, and then, for example, any hadith that talks about doing nawafil, like before Asr, is not authentic. There's no hadith authentic that talks about Ratiba, Sunan, Ratiba for Asr. Before Zuhr you pray 2 or 4, after Zuhr 2. Before Asr there is none. But there are a few ahadith from Ibn Umar, from Ali, from Ali ibn Abi Talib and others. Now all of these ahadiths are not authentic. So you could even go as far as to say it is hadithun mawdu', because the scholars have said there's no authentic hadith in this regard. So if someone comes to narrate with a chain that is relatively good and should be sound, we will conclude that this is mawdu'. Okay, this is a subject that I hope to discuss in some details some time later, because a lot of people misunderstand it, and people might even go as far as say Ibn al-Jawzi in his book al-Mawdu'at, he is mutasahil or he is mutashaddid, and he mentions things that should not be there, and it's generally not the case. Like Sheikh Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, anytime you find someone disagreeing with Ibn al-Jawzi on whether a hadith is mawdu' or not, mostly Ibn al-Jawzi is correct, and those who disagree with him, they are wrong. Al-Khatima, finally we've come to the concluding lines of the poem, and he says, وَقَدْ أَتَتْكَ الْجَوْهَرِ الْمَكْنُونِ سَمَّيْتُهَا مَنْزُومَةَ الْبَيْقُونِيِّ فَوْقَ الثَّلَاثِينَ بِأَرْبَعٍ أَتَتْ أَقْسَامُهَا ثُمَّ بِخَيْرٍ خُتِمَتْ وَقَدْ أَتَتْكَ الْجَوْهَرِ الْمَكْنُونِ. He said the poem has come. Okay, the poem has concluded as though it were a protected pearl, a protected gem. سميتها منزومة البيقوني, and I have called it منزومة البيقوني, the poem of Bayqūni. فوق الثلاثين بأربع أتت. The lines are nearly some 34 lines. أقسامها ثم بخير ختمت, and in one nuskha it is أبياتها. Okay, it has come in 34 lines, and بخير ختمت, and it's concluded in goodness. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.